Welcome, dear listeners, to a tale that begins with whispers of the sea and leads us into the shadowy depths of mystery. Imagine this, a colossal cruise ship, once the epitome of luxury, now lies abandoned on jagged underwater rocks, its secrets swallowed by time. But what happens when two young divers, driven by curiosity, decide to step inside? What they uncover is far beyond anything they, or you, could have imagined. So settle in, because today's story will take you on an unforgettable journey through darkness, danger, and discovery. Stay with me. You won't want to miss what comes next. It was big news when a giant cruise ship capsized at sea. 10 years later, it was completely abandoned and still lying on the underwater rocks where it was stranded. Two young divers, Mike and Jeff, decided to get a look inside. But they never expected to find what they found inside. Because when Jeff and Mike entered the cruise ship, they suddenly heard a loud scream in the distance. Mike looked at the rusty old door. He knew the scream came from in there. Unfortunately, it was locked. So they had to try and break it open. Jeff looked around him with his flashlight to see if he could find a pipe of some sort. When he suddenly saw a big crowbar lying on the ground, Jeff quickly picked the crowbar up and ran back to the door. He leaned back, knowing he only had one shot at getting this lock open, and slammed the crowbar down onto the lock. A loud bang thundered through the ship. The lock fell to the ground and Mike quickly flung the door open. They could not believe what they saw inside. Now the screaming suddenly made so much sense to them. They knew they had to call the police immediately, but what did the divers find on the cruise ship? Where did the strange screaming come from? And why did the police need to get involved? Before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. Jeff and Mike knew that nobody was allowed near the half-sunken cruise ship, but they did not care. From the moment they saw it, they wanted to get on it to check it out. And so the young divers set out in the early morning when nobody was going to stop them. The ship didn't look very sturdy. And who knows what they would find inside. It could be very dangerous. And if there was something happened to one of them, there was no way they would get back to shore in time. But Jeff didn't listen. He had already started looking for a way inside. As the ship was tilted, part of the upper deck lay in the water. So they could climb onto it and search for a door, but they had to be very careful. One slip up and they would slide straight into the water. Jeff fastened their boat to one of the crew's railings and gave one final look at Mike. But Mike just sighed and shook his head. He intended not to go inside, but once he saw Jeff climbing up the deck, he knew he couldn't leave him on his own. So he took a deep breath and went after Jeff. If only he knew then what a bad idea that was. As soon as they stepped inside the cruise, they could feel the eerie atmosphere of the ship. It was silent and dark, and the only sounds were the creaking of the metal framing and the lapping of the water. "Wait up!" Mike yelled as he ran after Jeff. His voice echoed through the remote halls of the ship. As Jeff and Mike explored the abandoned cruise ship, they came across many rooms, each with its own eerie atmosphere. Some rooms were locked, but luckily for them, not all the rooms were. They first entered the main hall, which was grand and spacious, with high ceilings all around and a large staircase leading up to the upper decks. However, the room was dark and dusty, and the furniture was covered in cobwebs. They could see the harrowing signs of neglect and abandonment everywhere. They then moved on to the cabins, which were small and cramped, with 2 or 4 beds in each room. But the beds were unmade, and the sheets were stained with mildew and mold. They could see suitcases still open, and clothes were strewn around the room as if the passengers had left in a hurry. As Jeff and Mike walked through the empty halls of the ship, they suddenly heard a strange noise. "Noise, did you hear that?" Mike said with a trembling voice. But Jeff seemed unfazed. He just shrugged his shoulders and moved on. But Jeff would soon find out what was really going on. After a little while, Jeff wanted to go down even further to the lower parts of the ship. There was a small stairway that could lead them there, but it was pitch black. So they got out their phones and used their flashlights to guide them. and as they got lower, the noise started to get louder. It sounded like a faint muffled scream and scared the out of both Jeff and Mike. They looked at each other with fear in their eyes, but knew they had to go further to investigate. Suddenly, the staircase ended, and they were in the mechanical section of the ship. They could hear the water drip down, and there was a little layer of water they had to walk through. They tried to be as quiet as possible so that they could follow the muffled sound, but the sound echoed through the ship. This made locating where the sound came from even harder. They walked deeper and deeper into the ship, and Mike was full of anxiety. He knew they could never find their way back if something happened to them. Different worst-case scenarios shot through his mind as he gazed over the wet and rusty walls of the ship. What had he gotten himself into? After walking for a little while, they finally reached an end. They knew they couldn't be at the bottom of the ship, so why was there a dead end? But then Mike noticed something. There was a little handle in the middle of the wall there. He pointed. "I see a door." Jeff grabbed the handle and pulled as hard as he could, but the door was stuck. He put his ear against the door and listened closely. "The sound is definitely coming from in here," he said. Mike stood beside him and also put his ear against the door. "I can hear it, but how will we get in?" Suddenly, they heard something that almost made their hearts stop. A boat was approaching the ship, and they could hear muffled sounds of men angrily speaking to each other. It sounded like they were also getting onto the cruise ship. Mike said, "I knew this was a bad idea." They knew they had to act fast. They rushed back to the stairwell. But as they started to walk upstairs, they heard loud footsteps coming down the stairs, so they quickly turned around, put their flashlight out, and hid behind the stairwell. They held their breath as the men came closer and closer. The sound of the heavy footsteps on the metal staircase thundered through the ship. They watched as 3 men came down the stairs and walked straight to the locked door. As the men opened the door, the muffled scream got louder, and Mike got a glimpse of what was going on inside. He whispered, "We have to get out of here and quickly." Jeff looked at him with a worried look on his face. "What did you see, Mike? Who was inside that room?" But Mike didn't say anything. That scream sounded like it came from a woman. Mike sighed as he knew Jeff was right, but this situation just got a whole lot worse. Those men didn't only outnumber Mike and Jeff, but they were also a lot bigger and stronger than them. And to make matters even worse, Mike noticed one of them carried a gun. They decided to call the police, but it would take time for help to arrive. Mike and Jeff resolved to investigate what the men were doing behind the closed door. Creeping closer, they overheard the men discussing the broken lock and concluded the intruders must still be on board. One of the men left to search the ship armed with a gun. Mai and Jeff quickly hid under the staircase, their hearts pounding as the footsteps receded. Mike panicked, but Jeff stayed calm and devised a plan to lure the men out and distract them. Searching in the dark, Jeff found a rock and hurled it at the stairs, creating a loud bang. The man inside the room rushed out, shouting for his companion Derek. As their footsteps faded upstairs, Jeff and Mike ran into the room. Just as Mike was about to follow Jeff inside, the men returned. He hid in the shadows, overhearing Derek scolding the other man and locking him inside with her until the intruders were caught. From the sounds within the room, Mike realized a fight had broken out between Jeff and the man, accompanied by muffled screams from a woman. Fueled by adrenaline, Mike ran upstairs shouting for Derek. The large man confronted him, hand on his gun. Thinking fast, Mike managed to grab Dirk's keys, leaving the man unconscious on the floor. Without wasting a second, Mike dashed back to unlock the door, hoping to find Jeff victorious. Instead, what he saw shocked him. As he swung open the door, he was greeted by the other man's angry face. This was bad. It almost felt like an action movie. Within seconds, Mike had scanned the room. He knew where Jeff lay. He knew someone was sitting in the middle of the room, and he knew he was about to get punched in the face by a man almost twice his size, but somehow he managed to defuse the situation. Mike stood in the doorway with confidence. "Hi there," he said calmly. "Your partner Derek is upstairs knocked out." But the man stayed unfazed. He had a dangerous look on his face, But Mike didn't seem to care. He was about to swing at Mike when the man suddenly fell to the ground. As the man fell, he revealed Jeff standing behind him with the crowbar in his hands. He had gotten up from the ground as the man stood facing Mike, and without his knowledge, he had smacked him on the head. Both men were now knocked out, but they still had to hurry. They could wake up any minute. Mike and Jeff hurried to the woman. She was forcefully bound to a chair with duct tape covering her mouth. Jeff carefully pulled the duct tape from her face, and she immediately cried out, "Please hurry. Get me out of here." Mike untied her hands and Jeff untied her legs. They could hear the police sirens from a distance. They helped the woman up as she was too weak to stand on her own, and together they walked back to the boats. The police finally arrived, and they were shocked to see what they were called to. They never expected to see this. They quickly hurried inside and arrested the two men. They got the woman to safety, and Mock and Jeff also had to come with them to the police station. Jeff and Mike were interrogated at the station, and they had to explain everything that had happened. They weren't supposed to be on the ship in the first place, so they were worried the police would arrest them for it. But instead, the police reacted very differently than they expected. Instead of arresting Jeff and Mike, they reward them for their bravery. It turned out that the woman they saved wasn't like any ordinary woman. She was the governor's daughter, and she had been held hostage for a few days now. The man had demanded money, but suddenly broke contact. If it weren't for Jeff and Mike, the woman would probably be dead right now. The governor praised the young men for saving his daughter and rewarded them with a big check. Jeff and Mike were still shaken up by what had happened. They couldn't believe this was real life. Jeff and Mike received a check from the governor so big, they decided to travel the world for a while. The scary ordeal scarred the men, but it didn't stop them from going on more adventures. They lived the rest of their lives like there was no tomorrow and enjoyed every minute of it.